I just was looking at my text messages. I have 17 of them in the last hour. I think that's a record. But my friend Patrick just disappointed that we're not talking guns in this hour, but guns will be back next Friday at 9 o'clock. And then I have, I have a hilarious series of tweets from my friend Michael that I just have been looking over. Soros is 86 and living in Hungary and is married. Uh, and then he sends along a photograph of the former mayor of Philadelphia, Frank Rizzo, and says, "Answer to Sarah Silverman's socialist coup." And it's the picture of Rizzo when he was attending. He was the mayor of Philadelphia in the 1970s, and he was just a powerhouse of a guy. I mean, he was as energetic as Donald Trump is, and he was a former police chief as well. And he showed up. There was a riot taking place in the city, but he also had to go to some large event that required him to wear a tuxedo. So he showed up, and in his cummerbund, he had a billy club. So Soros' wife, though, she is 42 years younger than he is. She has a yoga internet business. And then he writes, "What's a yoga internet business owner?" I guess you sit in front of a camera and it web streams, right? And you sit there and you just, tie yourself up in knots. So there you go. I just wanted to mention that I also am available by email at bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. And I also periodically through Facebook, I get these messages, instant messages during the course of the show, and they don't necessarily get as much attention as a telephone caller, but I try to look through these during the course of the program and then share them. And, by the way, if you go to our website today, newsradio1310.com, it has happened again. We had a moose in a basement in what was it, the Haley area the other day. This time around, it was an elk, which we had an issue with last year as well. This time, though, the moose didn't want to leave. They had to tranquilize it, and then they had to have 6 people carry it up the stairs and out because moose are a little heavy and they're a little ornery. But they managed apparently to get the elk out of the house this week by whacking it on the bottom with a hockey stick, which was in the basement. And the elk took off up the stairs and out the door. So that was at least a little easier. Last year they had one of these in a house up there, and it did its business, I think, on the floor, which is not a good thing to have. Here's another message about George Soros, and the writer does say, writer Sabrina says that he is married, and says he is not a fellow runner with the American press. I believe he owns the American press. As well as with other large influential social institutions. And he applied, it says, over $30 million to Hillary Clinton's campaign. He has a website that is pretty clear about his intentions. It is for the United States to be an open society. And the writer says he was largely responsible for the fairly recent financial depression in Europe, and it appears to be his desire to do the same in the U.S. In fact, he made a fortune in that big downturn we had back in 2008. I mean, he made a fortune. And we have to remember that this is a guy. He's like a corporate raider, but he does it. He tears apart countries. But I think that one I remember reading about that he was able to hoover up a lot of money by simply picking clean the carcasses of other businesses that had gone down. You can do that. There are bets you can make in the financial markets that are about failure, and he was able to win on failure. Then he turns around and uses that money he wants a global government. And you think about that, I brought this up the other day, we have the government we have because of certain elements that happened historically in Europe and then spread their way here with colonization of North America. And I referenced the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago. 500 years ago. We're celebrating that 5th century now, this year, 500 years ago. And Luther opened up the Pandora's box from a Roman Catholic perspective, but it then created a lot of other people who came out and said, well, wait a minute. I don't need someone telling me what's in the Bible. I can read it on my own and make my own decisions. Well, then you start reading it and you go, wait a minute. It says here that God loves me as much as he loves the king. Well, then, therefore, I have certain rights, God-given rights. And the Age of Enlightenment swept through Europe, Western Europe and Northern Europe, and then it came over here on boats, and people settled in this country, and and it just kept evolving. And then we had a Declaration of Independence, and then we had a Constitution, and these things acknowledge God-given rights and that no other man can take away from you. If you have a global government on the model that Soros wants, Hungary never experienced, by the way, any of that age of enlightenment. The Balkans and Eastern Europe, Russia, and they certainly didn't experience it throughout South Asia and East Asia and Africa. So if we had one worldwide global government, then all of a sudden we'd have to have some sort of negotiation going on with these other cultures, and we would lose our God-given rights. I don't have any at all feeling that we would be in any way a free people if this happened. You would essentially be an automaton in that great big cog, or or a cog in that great big wheel that would be spinning around. 912, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 27, and we have a caller with us. The number is 736-0300. Caller, you're up next.
Hey, Bill, this is Stone Age Man again.
Yes, sir. Quickly.
I want to thank your listeners so much, how much I appreciate them giving you some of this information on George Soros.
Yeah.
I just can't thank them enough. I really appreciate that kind of stuff.
Well, and thank you too for the input, because that's the great thing about a radio community, is that people can chime in and share all of these details, and I'm happy to see it too as well, because it shows that we're not alone in our beliefs and what our values are and what our hopes happen to be. You're up next, and you're on the air on KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. That age of enlightenment you were talking about, the highest point of it was during the colonial war, at the point where God took 3% of 13 colonies. He eventually came to more, and the French joined in, but he started it with 3%, and they put down this false doctrine of the divine right of kings.
Yeah.
And because people don't study their history, now that false doctrine is brought back by the false teaching of the churches, according to Romans 13.
Do you know that George Washington reportedly saw an apparition, and I think it was at Valley Forge, and the apparition explained to him, go forward, despite all odds, you're going to win.
Yeah, I believe it. I haven't heard that. I haven't studied that in that, but I believe it, yeah.
Well, I thank you much for the call. And again, it was a very tiny portion of the population that was actually out there fighting. This should have never happened. They should have never won. The odds, the greatest empire in the world, and a handful of farmers and cobblers and merchants, blacksmiths and the like, going out and fighting them, and won. 9:15, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. The man who was described by media on all sides as being alt-right, that is the Breitbart writer Milo Yiannopoulos. He was the fellow who was slated to speak at Berkeley a couple of nights ago when the liberals came in and started fires and started beating people up. He was appearing with Tucker Carlson on the Fox News channel, and he made, I thought, what was a very poignant, he really delved into why this is happening, and he said, it's not about me, it's about someone else.
Do you see that? Does this kind of thing appear to be escalating in the last couple of years?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of these protesters know they can't get at the president. They know they can't get at Trump now because now he's the president. Even when he was the president-elect, before that, they can't really get to him. So they pick the next best target. I'm a very outspoken speaker. I'm a big fan of his. I annoy, the feminists and the Black Lives Matter guys probably almost as much as Trump does, certainly on college campuses. So they go for the next best thing. They go for the target they can get to, or the person that they can get in physical proximity with, the person they think they can scare. Well, they don't scare me. I will continue to give college talks until the day I drop dead. But one of the things that I'm, of course, at the mercy of is decisions made by police to sort of let them get out of hand and then evacuate me from the building, which I don't have very much control over.
So, I just ask you a personal question. You're obviously an immigrant to this country. Our viewers can hear by your accent, and you grew up in the UK, where there is no First Amendment. When you came to the United States, I assume, like most immigrants, you believed your views would be protected by our famous First Amendment. Have you found that to be true?
I have been so shocked coming out. So I work for Breitbart, which is obviously an American media company. I'm here on a visa, actually. And, I've been so shocked at America, which I thought was going to be the sort of bastion of free speech.
And so he is disappointed having come here from somewhere else in the direction we're going. But what he said is, I am the stand-in for Donald Trump, which tells you that these violent mobs, what their real intent is when it comes to our legally elected president. And that's the frightening part. The ends justify the means for these people, and any means necessary justifies it. We are going to have to, and I hate to say it, we may have to go to war internally with these people. And I've said it for years on talk radio, and, sometimes we're a little hyperbolic. But I was talking to a friend of mine last week who's a very rational guy, and his name's Jake Smith. Jake said the same thing to me. Now, Jake used to be a reporter for one of the large, well, it wasn't necessarily, per se, a news network. But I worked with him in talk radio as well, and he shared that with me. And the more I've thought about this with what's going on over the last several days and weeks, he may well be right. 917, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. I'm wondering when Trump is going to keep his word on keeping us all safe and crack down on this nonsense. And it's, these guys are talking about creating a revolution in the military, creating a coup. If they do that, I'm here to tell you that they'll find out what the Second Amendment really is about, and they will really see how many guns there are in citizens' hands.
We happen to be, and I think that we're in one of the safest places in America. Alaska might be safe. I would think that in rural Texas is safe, if not the big cities. But if you're in Idaho and parts eastern Oregon and maybe parts of Utah, Wyoming, we don't have a lot to be worried about. But it's the people elsewhere who should be very, very concerned.
Well, I think what they're really going to be surprised about is how many people that are in the military are conservative. And when that kind of an order comes down, they're going to revolt. And guess what kind of equipment they're going to be hands-on on?
It's not going to. The order would not come from General James Mattis at the Defense Department. That's for sure.
Well, not at this point, no. But this is going to be an ongoing push. This is not a fight that's going to go away in 6 months, 2 years, 4 years. They've had power for a while. They've tasted power. They've been able to push everybody around, and they want to keep it, and they're not going to let it go very easily. We need to be a little bit humble, though, and we cannot get big-headed about it and push back and say, well, you did it, so now we can too.
Understood.
And we just need to go back to our Constitution, which will protect everyone under the sun.
I thank you much for the call. Good input. If it did happen, there would have to be an inversion in the military, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. But he's spot on. They had their way, and they forced people to do things against their will, whether it's be baking a cake or providing abortifacient drugs. These are the things that they're afraid of losing because we are pushing back. I have been telling people over the last several months about one of the most astounding weight loss programs ever developed by man. That is the Total Body Transformation System, which promotes healthy weight loss and wellness. It's not a yo-yo diet or a crazy fad diet. It's not a crash plan. It's sustainable after the weight is lost. I dropped 60 pounds in just under 4 months, and I've had friends who are well on their way to probably even beating that record. The system was developed by a company that's been in business now well over 2 decades, and the company has an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. And as I've been mentioning, too, they've had scientists look into it because some people were so astounded, they said, well, this can't be right. But scientists at some of the most prestigious universities in America, Columbia, Cornell, and Tufts, they took a look at it and said, this thing works, and it's not going to harm you at all. The Total Body Transformation System has been awarded 2 U.S. patents. One is for reducing waist circumference. The other is for increasing metabolic rate and weight control. The system is scientifically proven to burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. And it's a meal replacement plan that is healthier than most of the meals you've already been eating. You still get a healthy amount of calories. In fact, you can eat some of the foods you really like as well. I've been pointing out to people The important part of this for a lot of folks is what's the cost? Well, the cost is pretty much the same as the meals that you're replacing. So you're not going to be out any extra money when it comes to pocket expenses. I sat down, I broke down that cost over the course of a month, and it was like, that's what I'm spending on groceries. So there you go. People, by the way, would like to know more about how much weight you can notice people are losing, and the average participant in just 60 days will lose 22 pounds and 4 inches off the waist. Now, that's an average. Some people are losing, obviously, much, much more. And I do want to point out there's an unconditional full money back guarantee. Don Chandler, the marketing executive who is behind this diet and turned me onto it, he's right here in Twin Falls. Don lost over 50 pounds himself. His telephone number, 208-731-3560. If you'd like to know more about this amazing weight loss program, give Don a shout. The number again is 731-3560. Bill Colley with you today on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And we're at 28 right now. The thaw is going to continue over the next few days. I noticed a friend on Facebook had posted a photograph last night at her farm over in the Rupert area. Man, they got a lot more snow over there than we've got here. That's not surprising. I was in American Falls a few weeks ago, and I was driving around downtown, and it looked like it was lake effect snow the way it was all piled up. They've got a lot more over in that particular area. There's some concerns people have about flooding, and I think some of them are legitimate, obviously, in some places. But the meltdown is going to be, at least the first several days here, very gradual. It's the rain that may fall on it that we don't know yet how much rain is going to fall. That could make a big difference, but we're expecting some rain over the weekend. There's not a lot of sunshine in the forecast over the next week to 10 days. Now, that may change as we get into the early part of next week, but by the middle to late part of next week, we could have some areas that are up around 50 degrees every day, and that obviously will speed up that meltdown. And so I understand there are people in some spots. I don't have a lot of snow at my house. The other part of this I noticed when I was out walking today to get to the car is that it's now more slippery than it was a week ago. Because a week ago, we had, I seemed we were getting a couple of inches of snow every day. And that snow, you could walk on it, and at least it gave you some traction on the ice. But now as the meltdown continues, and then it'll melt some during the day, and then at night, that water freezes on the pavement or the sidewalks, and there's no snow on top of it any longer. So I had to drop by a big box store yesterday. I shouldn't. They're not an advertiser directly with us. I'll call it the big box store of Bentonville, Arkansas. You can figure that one out on your own. And a guy named Sam founded it. But I had to get out of the car in the parking lot, and the parking lot is clear where you drive, but where you park, and then you have to get out. So when I was young, I didn't care. I would just jump out, and if I went skidding and sliding and fell down, I'd be like, ha! But now I've gotten to a certain age. Today's the 3rd, right? So 15 years ago, Monday will be the 6th. 15 years ago, Monday, I'd never suffered a broken bone in my life. I was unloading some groceries from the trunk of the car one night, and I was standing on the black top of the driveway and a slight incline on the driveway. And the weather had been warm during the course of the day, and so some of the snow had melted, but the sun had already set. So all of a sudden you had that nice icy sheen. And while I was unloading the groceries, all of a sudden my left leg just did a pirouette, and I fell, and then I caught myself on the bumper of the car. But I realized that I was in a lot of pain. And so my dad taught me to be tough. He once stepped on a dock spike when he was working. It went right up through one of his feet. He drove himself to the hospital to have it treated with that same foot that had the hole in it on the gas pedal. He was a tough old bird. I once saw him leap off the porch. He was unloading some things at the house, and he leaped off the porch and he broke an ankle. And again, he finished loading the truck that they were working on and then got that treated. And so maybe I'm a little stubborn like him. My foot ended up. If you remember, they were talking about Prince Valiant earlier. Well, old comic strips. If you remember Alley Oop had really his thighs were really skinny, but from his knees down, his calves were huge, along with his feet. He was a caveman, if you don't recall the comic strip. Well, my left leg ended up looking like Alley Oop's left leg. And I didn't think anything of it. I couldn't tie my shoes, so I put sneakers on. I took the strings out, and for 9 days I walked around, and it just hurt, and it was swollen. And I got a little concerned about the swelling, figuring I had a bad sprain. So I went to see a doctor, and the doctor said, well, you better send you for x-rays. So they sent me off for x-rays, and a few minutes later, the doctor who did the x-rays walks in and says, well, it's a good thing you're not a horse. And what I had done is I had sheared my fibula on the left side. Now, that's the smaller bone. If it had been the other one, I probably wouldn't have been walking. But he said the only reason I was still walking around, he said, was because my legs were so muscular that it was holding everything in place. And then he showed me how, and he was right. It had sheared that bone in a particular way that it was like a very smooth break. And then he put a cast on me, and I said, what do I need this for? I can still walk. And he said, so you don't walk. He said, I'm trying to keep you immobilized for the next 6 weeks. And so I had to walk around with this blue fiberglass sock on, which wasn't a lot of fun. But the swelling stayed with me for a long, long time afterward, too. So as you get older, people wonder why older folks walk a little more slowly. It's not because we're doddering. It's just because we're a little more cautious because we don't want to go through that again. So when I step on ice, I'm a little bit more gingerly. I'll put one foot down as I was getting out of the Jeep yesterday at the store. Put one foot down and just put a little weight on it to make sure that I wasn't going to go sliding. Then you can get the other foot out, and then you can stand up, and then you can shuffle across it till you get to some pavement that isn't icy. One more half hour of our program coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. It's 28 at 9:30.